Now the next thing that I want to add in this game is some kind of score counter. At the moment, I've got pretty much everything else working and I'm able to infinitely climb up these platforms, but I've got no way of knowing how far I've gone or what the score is. There's a number of different ways you could track score in a game like this, but the way I'm going to do it is just look at how far I've climbed up and use that as the player's score. That means that I already have the variables that I need for this. I have this scroll variable and I have a score variable. Now this one is set to 0 because I needed to define it at the beginning, but I don't actually have any sections within the code yet that change it. And that's what I can add in just now. If we go down to the main game loop, down here, underneath where I've got my generation and updating of the platforms, so just where I've got this platform group.update, I'll add another little section here and I will say update score. So the score is going to be dependent on the scroll variable. Whenever I'm scrolling the screen, meaning that the scroll is greater than 0, I want to add that onto my score counter. So I can say that score is increased by the amount of that scroll variable. Now to show what that looks like, I can print this out down into the console. So we'll print the score and it starts off as 0, but as soon as I start jumping, remember there's a threshold somewhere up here that whenever the player hits it, everything else moves. So that's essentially saying that he's climbing up the screen. So I'm on 188 at the moment, but I jump a little higher, it goes up to 293, 299, and so on. I can just keep climbing and the score is going to increase with it. And that's fine, but I don't really want the score to be output here. I want to show it onto the screen itself. So what I'm going to do for that is add a little panel at the top here, and that's going to be separate from my game area. It's going to show me my my current score. To do that, I'll create a new function. I'll go back up to the top. At the moment, I have two functions already. I've got one for drawing text and one for drawing the background. So in between them, I will add another one, which is going to be my function for drawing info panel. The info panel at the moment will only have one item in it. So we'll say define def draw underscore panel. And this doesn't need to take any arguments. And all I'm going to do for now is just display that text on the screen. So remember, I already have my draw text function, so I can just call it here and put my score variable into it. So we'll say draw underscore text. The arguments that I need first of all are the text that I want to display. This is going to be score with a little space in front of it, and then the string variable of my score. So this will convert it to a string, attach it to this existing string here. Then the next two arguments that I need, the next one I need is the size of my font. So this will be font underscore small. The color is going to be white, and then the coordinates are 0, 0. So now I need to make sure that I'm calling this method, this function within my game loop. So I go back down to my main game loop, and I've got my background being drawn here, players being drawn. So just under this, I will add another little section. I'll say draw panel, and I will call that function that I've just defined, draw underscore panel. Now if I run this code again, I should be able to see this little display up here, score is 0. And as I climb up the screen, it should increase for me. And there we go. So now I've got this counter working okay. The problem that you may have noticed straight away though is it often blends in with the background. So when I jump onto a cloud, or rather when there's a cloud behind it, you can't actually see the text anymore because the text and the cloud are both white. Additionally, I don't really want to have all of this stuff visible up here. I actually wanted this to be a separate panel that keeps everything else separate from the main game area. So I'm going to update this draw panel function a little bit and add a couple more things to it. First of all, I want to draw a line that's going to act as my border between the panel and the game area. I'll just call pygame.draw.line, and this takes pretty much the same arguments as the other draw functions. So the first one is the location, which is the screen, then the color, which will be white, and now I need the start and end coordinates, so x and y for the start and end. It's going to start on the left hand side of the screen, so x coordinate is 0, it'll be 30 pixels down, so that's the start defined, and for the end it's going to go all the way across the screen, so that means that the end x coordinate is screen width, y coordinate remains at 30. And then additional argument here is going to be the line width, which I'll set to 2 pixels. If I run this again, I now have this white bar going across here, which kind of gives me a little bit of a separator. However, it doesn't really solve the problem of having anything behind it. So although it doesn't quite look like it, now you can see there's a platform there and clouds will appear as well. The easy fix here is I will just draw another background onto this section. So I will draw a rectangle with more or less the same color as this blue background here, but for my panel. So first I need to define a color for the panel. I'll come up here to where I've got my color section, and I will say panel equals. And the colors that I already picked out for it, it's 153, 217, and 234. This matches more or less the color of the background that I've used. So now I can use that panel, and I can go down to this draw panel function, and before I even get into that section of adding the line, I will add a rectangle. I'll say PyGame.draw.rect. Onto the screen, the color is going to be panel, and then it's just the usual. I need the X and Y coordinates, and then I need the width, which will be screen width, and the height, which is 30 pixels. Now if I run this again, now I've got the same thing here, but you notice nothing appears behind it. So there's a little bit of a cloud that you can see there, and a little bit of a cloud there. So this actually keeps my areas separated, but all that's happening is I'm just drawing a rectangle over there first, which covers up anything that's in the background. So I could change that panel color to make it more obvious. I could change it to 253, 117. And there you go. So now you can see a lot more clearly what's going on. But I never really wanted to have that contrast. So you could have a different color here, but I deliberately wanted it to be the same as my sky background, so it doesn't really look like a separate area, but it gives me this functionality. Now it's fine to have a way of tracking the score, but what I would also like to have is a high score, so that whenever I play this game, I can actually set a high score and I'll be able to see what that is and try and beat it. Now to do that, I'm going to save the score within a new file here, and that's going to allow me to save and load that high score every time I play the game. If I'm going to access additional files, then there's another module that I need to import here, and that's called OS. So I need to import OS, and I need to define some additional variables. Now the main variable is high score. So I'll have a variable called high_score, and it's going to be set to 0 to begin with. However, I also want to first of all check whether I have a file here that already has a score in it, so that I can check what the high score previously was. And to do that, I can load in the file for me. I'll say with open, and the name that I'm going to use for this file is going to be score.txt, and I'm going to open it for read, so that I can read from it, but I don't want to write to it at this point. And I open it as file. Then my high score variable, instead of 0, which I've got below, I will say my high score is equal to, well, if I can say file.read, that will read out the information from it. However, it will return a string. So I need to make sure that I convert that string into an integer, and that will be my high score. So temporarily, I can comment this out and see what happens. Now I'm trying to open a file here, but it doesn't actually exist. So straight away, I get an error to say there's no such file or directory as score.txt, because there isn't one. There's nothing here. That means that I need an additional check here first of all. I need to say, does that file exist first of all? We'll say if os.path.exists, the name of that file, score.txt, and if it does, then I'll load in that file, I'll load in information from it, and I'll extract the high score. But if it doesn't exist, that means that, well, we're just going to have to skip that section and say the high score therefore is just 0. We're starting off with nothing. Run that again, and now I don't have an error. I suppose what I should do is print out the high score so we can actually see what it is, but it should just be set to 0. So I'll come back down here and just say print high_score. Run that, and it's just set to 0. There's no file, it couldn't find one, but it didn't throw an error because I did a check for it first of all. So now I need to actually update the high score as the player plays the game. Now you could just track it constantly throughout the main game loop, so whenever a new score is set, you could just set the high score to that score if it beats the previous one, but I'm going to set it a little bit differently. I'm going to update the high score only when the player dies. Essentially, once you've gone as far as you can and the game is over, then you get a new high score from it. Now the game over check happens down here. So remember, I had this section here that said if game over is false, then we run all the main game logic underneath it. But otherwise, that means that the game over variable is true. So this is the game over logic here. Now within here, I can add my high score updates as well. I currently have my fade counter here, and then I'm drawing my text and everything underneath it. So below that text, I will add another little section, with a comment to say update high score. And first of all, I need to know whether the current score has beaten that. So I need to do a check if score is greater than the high score. Well, the first time I play this, it will be, or it'll be at least the same, because the score and high score both start off at 0. There's nothing to load in yet, that file hasn't been created. But if the high score has been beaten, then my high score is set to the current score. So that's fine, but now I need to store that information within that file. Now the logic here is going to be the exact same thing. I need to open the file, but this time I open it for writing. I'll say with open score.txt, and the context here now is W instead of R, so now we're opening it to write to it as file, and now we say file.write, and what I'm going to be writing back to it is not just the high score, because that is an integer. I'm going to be writing the string version of it. So I first of all convert it into a string. Make sure you close the brackets here, so you got 2 of them. And that's pretty much it. So what will happen here is that if I don't currently have a high score, a score file, which I don't, then when I come to this section, it will create one for me and write my high score into it. So let's test this out. I'll jump up to get an initial score. So I've got a few hundred there, fall off. And you notice now I have this file here. And if I open up, it's got my high score in it of 392. So I can see that that is now working correctly. I have, however, noticed a little bug, or rather something that I've missed. When I fall off, the intention with this fade or transition was that all the text is going to be displayed on the screen after the transition is complete. But at the moment, everything happens at the same time. So as soon as I fall off, that text is displayed, even though the transition is still happening. So what I'm meant to do here is add an else statement that all of this is going to be wrapped inside. So if I say here, if fade, I know this is jumping back to the previous video, but it's just to tidy it up a little bit. If the fade counter is less than the screen width, then that means that I'm going to be running the fade counter. As soon as it's finished, so an else statement here, I want to do all of the rest of the code. So I actually need to indent all of this stuff so that it happens after the fade effect is complete. If I run this again just to double check, okay, now you see nothing happens until all of those rectangles go across the screen. So it looks a little bit better that way. And it was a simple fix, I just missed this else statement before. Now there's one last thing that I want to do with this high score, and that is there's no actual way of seeing where the high score is other than opening that file up. I could add another piece of text here that's going to show me the high score, but I thought it would be a little bit better to actually have a line across the screen when you reach it that is your high score marker. So to add that in, I will go back up into my main game logic here, and where I've got my my score being updated initially, I'll add another little section underneath it, and I will say draw line at previous high score. Code for this is just the same as before, pygame.draw.line, and it's going to go onto the screen, the color is white, and then I need to give it start and end coordinates, x and y coordinates for both the start and end. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky, so I'll type it all out and then I'll explain. The x coordinate is going to be 0, the y coordinate will be my current score, take away the high score plus the scroll threshold. And the result here is going to be, if I have a high score of say 1000 and a current score of 0, well, this is going to give me a negative value, which on the y coordinate, remember, means up the way. So this line is going to be drawn way off the top of the screen, and it's only going to come onto the screen when this score gets to that point. So that essentially means that when I reach that high score again, I'll see this line. So that covers the start point. The end point will be exactly the same, but the x coordinate is now going to be the other side of my screen. So we copy this down and we say screen width for this part. And lastly, just this one argument at the very end is going to be my thickness for the line, and I'll set that to 3 pixels. If I run this again, my previous score was, I believe, 392, so I should be able to get to that point pretty quickly. So what I should have is a line appearing when I reach that score. Wow, I was very ambitious there. Try that again, go up. There we go. So I'm not doing very well under pressure, but you saw a little line come up there across the screen. There it is. So that line there is when I reach the score of 390. And now that I've beaten that score, I'm on 664. I need to die for it to count. If I go back up again, you'll see that the score is now, that line is on a higher point. And there it is, it comes in again. So that's kind of it finished, but I just want to add in text to explain what that is so that you don't just appear at this thick line and not know what it means. So I'll draw text onto that screen. The text that I want is just saying high score. We'll use font underscore small. Color will be white. And then I need the X and Y coordinates for this. So X coordinate will be screen width minus 130, and then the Y coordinate again is that calculation that I've used here. Except I kind of want it to sit slightly above that line. Although no, in fact this will bring it up just slightly below, so that might be fine as well. Let's run this and see what happens. Now I should, well, when I get to that point I should be able to see a little display of what that is. There we go. Okay, that did work pretty well. So I'm showing my high score and it explains what that line is. And I think that looks quite a bit better than just having the high score displayed there, because you can actually reach it and see where it is visually. Now, one limitation of the way I've done it here, where I update my high score only when the player dies, is that if I close the window like I was just about to previously, it doesn't save the high score, it just exits the game. So what I could do is just simply take this code here, this little section here, copy that, and also put it into when I've got my event handler. So remember, I only had one event, which is when I click the exit button. And all that happens is the run variable is set to false. This is what controls my entire game loop, so it just kicks me out. Well, before I set the variable to false, I could have this section here, which saves that file and saves my high score. So I could test that. I'll delete this file, so I don't have a score anymore. And let's run this again. So my high score currently is nothing. There is no high score. And if I just jump up, set a little bit of a high score without dying, I save that, close that, sorry, and it creates the file for me again. So now it covers me for more scenarios, and pretty much regardless of whether you close the game or whether you die, the high score is always saved. And that's it. That's how you save and load a high score within a game. So I hope that was useful, and thanks for watching.